The NYPD believes violence has been deliberately stirred up by outside groups trying to hijack the protests. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo called for protesters to use common sense.
That violence never works. How many protests have we had? How many nights have we gone through like last night?
Over 30 NYPD officers were hurt over the weekend. Cuomo says the National Guard is on standby. Yesterday, thousands of people marched through multiple neighborhoods, chanting, kneeling in the street, and falling silent for a minute in front of the police station in Times Square to remember the people killed by police. Mayor Bill de Blasio says he has no plans to impose a curfew.
When you add up how many things were happening in how many places all over this city, it says something about New York City. It says something about the people of New York City. It says something about the NYPD, that thank God there was no loss of life. There were no major injuries.
De Blasio also reacted to a video of two police cruisers plowing into protesters in Brooklyn, saying, "I did not like what I saw one bit. I don't want to ever see that again." Among the hundreds of protesters arrested over the weekend was Mayor de Blasio's daughter. Chiara de Blasio was arrested for unlawful assembly with a group of protesters at 12th Street near Broadway. She was given a desk appearance ticket. The number of COVID-19 cases in New York State continues to decline. Governor Cuomo.
Net change in hospitalizations down again, intubations down again, number of new deaths still dropping.
There were 56 new deaths reported in New York State from the coronavirus. In New Jersey, more businesses in the state under lockdown can begin reopening soon. The governor said horse racing can begin as soon as next weekend, while child care centers can open on June 15th. In Connecticut, hair salons and barbershops are reopening today. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thanks, Michael. It's 5:09 on Wall Street. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Good morning, John Stashower.
And good morning, Nathan. It's the start of a big week. If baseball is to come to an agreement on how much players should make in a shortened season without fans, last week was the owner's proposal, loudly panned by players who are now making their pitch back. The details do not sound like something that will lead to a deal. They want full pay for the games being played. They admit pay for those making $10 million a year or more can be deferred, but only if the postseason can't be played, and the payback should come with interest. They say if a player chooses not to play due to concerns about the virus, they should still be paid. They want more games, expanded playoffs in 2021. They pitch ideas to make baseball more popular, like an off-season all-star game and players mic'd up during games, but if there are no games in 2020 because of money, baseball figures to become significantly less popular in the years ahead. Some athletes were part of the weekend-long protest. The Celtics' Jaylen Brown drove 15 hours to his native Georgia to protest in Atlanta. Michael Jordan, for so long criticized for not speaking out about non-basketball issues, released a statement in the wake of the death of George Floyd. He said he's pained, saddened, and angry. Thabo Sefolosha of the Houston Rockets said George Floyd could have been him. Sefolosha in 2015 was wrongly attacked by New York police outside a Manhattan nightclub. They broke his leg. He sued, settled for $4 million, which he largely donated to charity. NASCAR, Bristol, Tennessee, the leaders, Chase Elliott and Joey Logano, crashed with a lap to go, and the race was won by Brad Keselowski. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan.
And John, let's talk for a second about what could have been in this week in the sports world. The NBA and NHL playoffs were scheduled to happen this week, along with the final leg of racing's Triple Crown. That was supposed to have happened on Saturday. Instead, the Belmont Stakes will be the Triple Crown's first race this year. It'll take place in about 3 weeks, June 20th, with no fans. And this would have been the second week of the French Open, with fourth-round matches, quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals. S&P futures are down 6 points right now. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
Debbie Hart is...
We're Cadent. Keeping you and our people safe is our main focus, and our vital work must continue. You'll start to see more of us in your area as we increase our work to upgrade the gas pipes to keep the energy flowing into your homes and businesses. We may need to come into your home to complete this work, but rest assured our engineers are following all government guidance on PPE and social distancing. We continue to provide the critical gas emergency service, and if you smell gas, call 0800 111 999. To all other key workers, we would like to say a big thank you from everyone at Cadent. Cadent, your gas network.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment. Feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
Emma, the UK's most awarded mattress in 2019. Try it out for 200 nights risk-free. Made in the UK. Go to emmamattress.co.uk to order now.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed. Retrieve data fast. Scalability. Grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity. Easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
Here's Emily Chang on Bloomberg Technology.
With so many countries under lockdown around the world, that means there has been a growing backlog of legal cases, and with courts slowly starting to reopen up, this is a challenge. Joining us to talk about the bottleneck is Sunita Bali, partner at Perkins Coie law firm. We're seeing massive court backlogs. Talk to us about what this actually means.
You know, courts are trying to balance the safety concerns for the public and court employees with the need to continue judicial operations. And one of the side effects has certainly been delays. There's been a variety of approaches taken by courts, state and federal courts across the country, as things continue to change rapidly and courts try to find ways to adapt to the constant changes. As you mentioned, some courts are already preparing to reopen. They're putting protective measures in place, such as requiring face coverings or taking temperatures prior to entering the courthouse. And they plan to have some proceedings go forward in business cases in person, whereas other courts have transitioned to conducting hearings by telephone or video conference to keep things moving.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. U.S. stock index futures are lower this morning, while European shares hold on to modest gains after Chinese officials told agriculture companies to pause imports on some farm goods. There's no trading in Germany or Switzerland today, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 7 points this morning. Dow futures down 35. NASDAQ futures down 40. The DAX in Germany, well, no trading there today, as we said, and the FTSE 100 is up 1%. 10-year Treasury down 230 seconds. Yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down about 0.8% or 28 cents at $35.22 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.1% on $1.80 at $17.49.80 an ounce. The euro 1.1133 against the dollar. British pound 1.2414 and the yen 107.48. Today we are watching for reports on construction spending and manufacturing out at 10 o'clock Wall Street time. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Thank you very much, Karen. Tens of thousands of protesters have again taken to the streets across America. Peaceful demonstrations yesterday against police killings of black people have been overshadowed by unrest that quickly ravaged cities from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. A truck driver drove into demonstrators in Minneapolis, where George Floyd died after a white police officer put his knee on his neck for more than 8 minutes. Outside the White House, police fired tear gas and stun grenades into a crowd who lit fires in a street. Thieves in more than 20 California cities smashed into businesses and ran off with cell phones and TVs. Atlanta's mayor says 2 police officers have been fired and 3 others placed on desk duty over excessive use of force during a weekend protest incident. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. It is 5:19 on Wall Street, and live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak. Dennis Gartman is with us this morning, economist and former publisher of the Gartman Letter. At a pivotal moment, it seems, in this country, Dennis, there had been so much optimism in the markets surrounding the prospects for reopening the economy during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, with cities across the country in many ways literally on fire, what does this mean for the image of the United States as a place to invest?
It can't be good, Nathan. It just simply cannot be good. As I've always said in interviews and speeches and in writing, all economics boils down to the propensity of somebody to take action. And at the margin, when the last 2% of the sellers become buyers, or when the last 2% of the buyers become sellers, price changes. At the margin, one has to think that the propensity for money to move to the United States has been greatly reduced. I mean, if I were a German, if I were a Brit, if I were a Japanese investor, my propensity to move money to the United States would be almost nil. My propensity to take money out of the United States would be greatly enhanced. And I was surprised, I must admit, I was stunned last night, given the political circumstances that prevailed over the weekend, given the rioting, the eruption, the near revolutionary activities that have taken place across the country. When I was asked yesterday afternoon what I thought the Dow would open, I thought the futures would open 300, 400 lower. The fact that they only opened 250 lower was surprising to me. The fact that they actually got higher during the middle of the evening last night was even more surprising to me. I'm stunned by this. It is revolution and rioting supportive of stock prices? For some reason, it seems to be. It makes no sense, but that's what's happening.
And the interesting aspect of that as well is that now we've started to see futures in the United States turn lower on the news from our Bloomberg colleagues this morning that China is considering pausing some U.S. farm imports, particularly soy. It's interesting to see what the market appears to be focused on. It almost seems like it's all about China at this point.
Well, in the last hour and a half or 2 hours, it has become of China. What is interesting to me is that the bean futures overnight, corn futures overnight, have not gone demonstrably lower. One would have thought, given that news out of China, that soybeans would have fallen 20 or 30 cents per bushel, that corn would be down a nickel or a dime, that wheat would be down 15 or 20 cents, and yet they're very, essentially unchanged. The markets seem to me to be as illogical and as strange as I have ever seen them in my 45 years of being involved.
When you talk about movement at the margins, what do you think would take investors just beyond the margins and changing their way of thinking? What do you think is driving market sentiment at this point?
Well, I think it's the Federal Reserve policies and the monetary authorities around the world are all being expansionary, and they should be, given the circumstances that prevail, given the coronavirus, given the rebellions, given the rioting in the United States, given the decline in employment, the rise in unemployment, whether it's here in the United States or in Europe, given the fact that everybody's optimistic this morning because the PMIs in Europe were a little bit better than expected, but they're still down below 50. The monetary authorities have to be expansionary, and the old rule is don't fade the Fed. I've tried to fade the Fed. It makes sense for me to fade the Fed, but fading the Fed has been a losing proposition. So it is all monetary authority expansionary policy that is driving stock prices higher.
Do you see monetary policy expanding even further given the unrest we're seeing in the country right now? Does that move the Fed?
It has to. It cannot be. They cannot move off center. They have to continue to be expansionary. They have no choice at this point. So they can talk about allowing the Fed to slow down the purchases of bonds, but they have no choice. They have to be continuously expansionary. Us, the ECB, the Bank of China, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, they have no choice.
So what does that mean for Treasury yields? I mean, is there a possibility that if the Fed continues with the expansionary policy that it has been on, that we could see negative yields on Treasuries?
It is possible. At the short end of the curve, you could get down to You could take it to negative. I think that the Fed doesn't want to do that. They've made their statements several times, and I think Mr. Powell has been openly non-supportive of the possibility of moving to negative rates. But short rates can go to near zero. At the long end of the curve, however, I could see long rates moving somewhat higher, and the yield curve becoming far more positively sloped, which would help the banking community. So I think inflationary pressures, and they will be extant given the expansionary monetary policies eventually. All inflation is a monetary phenomenon. I still am a monetarist at heart. So the long end of the curve could see rates go higher. The short end of the curve could see rates go lower, and a much more positive sloped yield curve, which would be helpful to the banking system.
We're speaking with Dennis Gartman, economist and former publisher of the Gartman Letter, with us this morning on Bloomberg Daybreak. You have been watching the markets for decades. I wonder how you compare the moment we're in now with unrest in the country, concerns about the coronavirus continuing even as the economy reopens, to past crises we've gone through, the Occupy Wall Street movement, the 2008 crisis, 1968. How do you use those moments to compare how we could get through what we're experiencing now?
Well, we will get through this eventually. Let us hope that we shall get through this. I don't want to think otherwise. The closest to the approximation is what happened in 1968 to 1970 with the increased activity in the war in Vietnam, racial strife in Cleveland, the Watts conflagration. This is the closest thing I can imagine is what happened back then. And it took us several years to get through it. We will get through this, but those of us who make our living trading, we live from Tuesday to Tuesday. Sometimes you live from Tuesday morning to Tuesday afternoon in many instances. But the closest thing is the late 1960s and early 1970s. And let us, we got through that. We'll get through this. Let's hope.
A lot of the difference between those moments and the current one is the leadership in this country. The president over the weekend didn't make any public comments, but did do a lot of tweeting, talking about Antifa, the possibility of labeling it as a terrorist organization and taking a strong stance against the protesters, even outside the White House. How does the difference in presidential leadership affect how things could turn out here?
Well, let's first of all understand that I'm somewhat to the right of Genghis Khan politically and economically, and I did in fact vote. And I did in fact vote for Mr. Trump, but he has not handled this as well as I think previous presidents might have handled this. One would have hoped. Mr. Reagan would have handled it demonstrably differently. He would have gone on national television and talked to the American people. The president probably should have done that rather than use tweets. And tweets are too short in nature, too cursive, too short. And I would have liked to have seen the president come on TV last night and say, "Look, we understand what happened in Minneapolis, but what is happening across the country is illogical and ill-advised, and we will not stand for it." His comments last week on when the rioting starts, the shooting begins, was I thought just ill-advised on his part. Let us hope that cooler heads do prevail. We've had black leaders come out and say this is not what we want to do. This is not in the best interest of the black community. Let us hope that better heads prevail. They probably shall, but it shall take another week or two before they do.
And if cooler heads do prevail,
and let us hope
as we head into the weeks and months ahead, does any of this change your prospects for what the shape of the economic recovery could look like as we head into the second half?
It can give rise to a V shape. It probably won't give rise to a U shape. I've said before it'll give rise to a weak W where each leg is demonstrably lesser than the previous one. This is going to take a long period of time. Let us hope that Mr. Powell continues to be expansionary. They have to be. Let us hope that the Congress becomes even more amenable to fiscal irresponsibility, for lack of a better term, and sponsors greater infrastructure spending requirements. As a right winger, I would normally be antithetical to that, but we have no choice at this point. That's right now, I think share prices are extremely high. I think stock prices probably could go lower, but I would have thought that the Dow would have opened 500 lower and not traded higher, and I was wrong about that overnight.
Well, I wonder at what point does political risk become a factor that markets begin to consider? I mean, we're less than 6 months away from an election here. Does that come on the table at some point? I mean, given all the factors that markets have to look at right now.
Sure it does. So, and the barometer for that will be the dollar versus the euro. The dollar versus the euro the dollar had been extraordinarily strong, and I thought it was going to continue. But when the European Union last week, when the French and the Germans reached an accord on spending, when the frugal four agreed to it, that was a change in monetary policy, a change in political policy over in Europe. So keep an eye on what the euro is doing. Anything above 112, and we could quickly get to 117. The dollar will be the barometer, and right now I think we see a weakening U.S. dollar.
Yeah, we're seeing that.
We're probably going to keep an eye on gold too, because if gold gets to 1750 in the nearby and gets to 1775, all bets are off on the downside on stock prices.
Yeah, and of course on the session this morning, we're seeing weakness on both fronts between the dollar and gold. Gold trading slightly lower this morning, just shy of the 1750 level at 1748.90. Dennis Gartman, always good getting your insights. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. That is Dennis Gartman, economist and former publisher of the Gartman Letter, with us on Bloomberg Daybreak. Karen, back to you.
All right, Nathan, thank you. It is 5:30 on Wall Street. We're just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are lower after the sixth day of protests in cities across the country. Police in Minneapolis fired flashbangs last night to disperse protesters after the city's curfew went into effect. Meantime, in New York City, demonstrations continued for a fourth day. There were peaceful demonstrations across the country interspersed with violent clashes. Demonstrators took to the streets in dozens of cities, including Chicago and L.A., to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. Chicago's plan to lift coronavirus restrictions this week may be delayed due to the protests. Demonstrations are adding to what's already a tense environment in many parts of the country. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker.
We have communities all around the state that are desperately trying to recover from the damage that this virus has done. And I'm imploring people to not force a difficult second rebuilding on our small businesses in the course of expressing your very justified pain.
Chicago is set to start reopening Wednesday. Now Mayor Lori Lightfoot is consulting with officials to reconsider the plan.
Now, despite the protests, U.S. futures had been gaining overnight, but now they're lower after a Bloomberg News exclusive on the state of trade relations between the U.S. and China. Sources say the Chinese government is telling state-run agriculture companies to pause purchases of U.S. farm goods. The move is said to be tied to Beijing evaluating the ongoing escalation of tensions over Hong Kong.
At the same time, China is accusing the U.S. of undermining bilateral relations and, quote, disregarding facts when it comes to Hong Kong. President Trump last week moved to rescind the city's special trading status. China says the measure would gravely interfere with China's internal affairs. Beijing says any words or actions that hurt China's interests will be met with firm counterattacks. Now let's get you up to date on how stocks are faring. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 6.5 points. Dow futures down 34. NASDAQ futures down 41. There's no trading in Germany today, and the FTSE 100 is up 1%. 10-year Treasury down 2/32, yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.7% or 24 cents at $35.25 a barrel. COMEX gold is down about 0.2% or $3.20 at $17.4850 an ounce. The euro is at 1.1123 against the dollar. British pound 1.2403, and the yen is at 107.55. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. It is 5:33 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's happening around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Protests over the death of George Floyd in police custody stretched into a fourth day in New York City on Sunday after there was citywide vandalism. Police cars were set ablaze and hundreds were arrested during several days of protests. In Soho, there were several stores looted. Large crowds angry over the George Floyd death gathered peacefully for hours around New York City in the day. However, by the night, some clashes with police were reported, along with small street fires and looting. Mayor Bill de Blasio believes violence in New York City over the weekend was caused by outsiders hijacking peaceful protests over the police custody death of George Floyd. De Blasio said among the thousands of demonstrators who marched through the streets, there were those he called agitators.
The X factor here of a different kind of small set of, I would call them not just protesters, but people who came to do violence in a systematic, organized fashion. That is a different reality we need to grapple with.
Police Commissioner Dermot O'Shea said his officers encountered some of the worst incidents on 125th Street in Harlem over the weekend and blame agitators who took over.
What we quickly identified, though, was a group within that used the 125th Street peaceful demonstration. I would liken it to hijacking a peaceful demonstration.
Close to 36 officers sustained minor injuries. More than 300 protesters were arrested, including the 25-year-old daughter of Mayor de Blasio. Chiara de Blasio was given a desk appearance ticket. The number of COVID-19 cases in New York State continues to decline. Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Number of lives lost down to 56, which is, in this absurd reality we live in, actually very, very good news.
In New Jersey, more businesses in the state under lockdown can begin reopening soon. The governor said horse racing can begin as soon as next weekend, while child care centers can reopen on June 15th. In Connecticut, hair salons and barbershops are reopening today. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. 5:35 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Here's John Stashar.
All right, Nathan. Last week we heard from the baseball owners their plan for a shortened 2020 season without fans. Players reacted quite negatively. Union now set to make its pitch significantly more games. MLB called for 82. The Union wants 114. More games, more pay for them, but baseball feels more games, the more money they'll lose. The only financial concession made by the players, an offer to defer some payments, but only if the postseason can't be played because of a second wave of the virus. It sounds as if the two sides are very far apart. Meanwhile, Latest team to announce layoffs and furloughs, the Arizona Diamondbacks, 25% of their staff. We've already seen the financially strapped Oakland A's say they can't afford to pay minor leaguers $400 a week. Pittsburgh Pirates stopped contributing to employees' 401k plans. Even the big market Red Sox have cut employee salaries. Yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of the J.R. Smith brain freeze. Playing for Cleveland in the NBA Finals at Golden State, the former Knick grabbed a rebound with the score tied. Instead of shooting to try and win the game, he dribbled away thinking the Cavs were ahead. Smith, who didn't play this season, back in the news. The window of his truck was smashed during the protests in L.A., and Smith is seen in a TMZ video beating up the white man who he says did it. Smith was seen punching, kicking, and later boasting about it. Another NASCAR race. This one, Bristol, Tennessee. Same winner as the previous race in Charlotte. Brad Keselowski, he won when Chase Elliott and Joey Logano, both ahead of him, crashed with a lap to go. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. It is 5:37 on Wall Street. It's time for the Tri-State Business Report. Here's Bloomberg's Ed Corey.
New York City's finance industry won't recover from the devastation wrought by COVID-19 until 2026. That's according to an analysis by software firm ThinkIQ that ranks U.S. employment markets. The New York City region lost about 8% of its finance jobs this year, down from a peak of more than 800,000 last August. Atlantic City's casinos could reopen by the July 4th weekend after months of closures to curb the advance of the coronavirus. That's according to Governor Phil Murphy. New Jersey's in the first stage of a multi-stage reopening plan that aims to return the state to some form of normalcy amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the road to economic recovery from the coronavirus can't be built fast enough for Connecticut's travel industry. Data from the Connecticut Department of Labor shows a loss of more than 72,000 tourism-related jobs in a month's time, the biggest decline among any of the sectors the state agency tracks. That's your Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report. I'm Ed Corey.
Thank you, Ed. It's 5:38 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Jeff Bellinger, and on WTVN in Columbus, I'm reporting on the shutdown of some Amazon delivery stations because of violent protests in some cities.
I'm Roger Hearing. On Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London, we're reporting on criticism from scientists on the government's easing of the lockdown.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and for WBBM in Chicago, I'm talking about China halting some U.S. farm imports, threatening the trade deal.
I'm Ed Corey on WWJ in Detroit. I'm reporting Lear is implementing costly safety measures at a plant in Mexico.
Those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. It is 5:39 on Wall Street, and the latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is online now with the cover story on President Trump's political gamble to reopen the economy. Terminal customers can receive a complimentary subscription at MAG Go and listen to Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly right here on Bloomberg Radio, or watch it on YouTube. Weekdays from 2 to 6 p.m. Wall Street time. Get global business, finance, and tech news on your TV, computer, or mobile device. Just visit youtube.com and search Bloomberg Global News. And now some other stories we're following this morning. Goldman Sachs says the U.S. labor market is showing the earliest signs of recovery. In a report to clients, economist John Hotsius wrote a drop in continued jobless claims, especially in states that reopened earlier than others, suggests rehiring by businesses may be starting to turn the tide. Senior Facebook employees are criticizing Mark Zuckerberg. They went on Twitter to express their unhappiness that their CEO is not taking action on incendiary comments President Trump posted on Facebook. Last week, the president posted a message saying, quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Zuckerberg says he didn't put warnings on that post because people need to know if the government's planning military action. And shifting gears now, the semiconductor industry will reportedly lobby the U.S. government for billions in federal funding. According to the Wall Street Journal, chip makers want the money for factory building and research. The goal is to keep the U.S. in front of China and other countries that heavily subsidize their own chip industries. S&P futures are down 7 points right now. Dow futures lower by 38. NASDAQ futures down 46. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our #1 priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC. This is your Bloomberg.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
If you can build that flat-pack wardrobe without looking at the instructions, you've still got it. If you can manage 5 keepy uppies on your first go, you've without question still got it. If you can toss a pancake to the ceiling and not let it hit the floor, surely you've still got it. And if you can just about fit into those jeans you bought 5 years ago, you've definitely still got it. Brute, still got it.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game. From rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV show in the Division Series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the playoffs, and I didn't think they belonged in the playoffs.
I think overall, though, it was a great divisional round weekend because you got the first one.
Run into the end zone with the Move the Sticks podcast.
We had a fun little Zoom cocktail hour last night.
Oh, yeah.
What a star-studded affair. Greg, you were there for the earlier part, but it really popped off a little later on. We had Zach Goldman.
And dive deep into the sidelines with the Peter King podcast.
On the occasion of his 50th birthday, come down and record a little bit of retrospective on the life and times of Brett Lorenzo Favre.
That sounds like a bestseller.
It sounds like a precursor to a funeral. That's what it is.
I wasn't thinking that.
Explore these and more hard-hitting NFL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
And at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update. Special reports, protests and violence. Tens of thousands of protesters have again taken to the streets across America. Some 4,400 arrested nationwide. Peaceful demonstrations Sunday against police killings of black people have been overshadowed by unrest that quickly ravaged cities from Los Angeles to New York City, where we find our Steve Kastenbaum.
Throughout the day Sunday, tens of thousands of people took part in peaceful, nonviolent protests across New York. At times, some even made peace with police officers. But as day turned to night and crowds thinned, some who remained on the streets clashed with police. There were more scenes of bottles being thrown, some cops appearing to use excessive force.
West cities and smaller towns throughout the state of New York. I'm John Trout.
They don't just talk to the most important people.
Is it as ominous this time around?
They talk with the most interesting people.
Are they taking this seriously?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Pause imports of some farm goods. No trading in Germany or Switzerland today. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. Right now, S&P futures are down about 8 points. Dow futures down 48. NASDAQ futures down 50. The DAX in Germany, again, no trading there. And the FTSE 100 is up 0.9%. 10-year Treasury down 230 seconds, yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9% or 31 cents at $35.18 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.2% or $2.70 at $17.49.20 an ounce. The euro 1.1114 against the dollar. British pound 1.2389 and the yen 107.61. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen protests have swept the United States in the last 6 days in the wake of George Floyd's death at the hands of police in Minnesota. Derek Chauvin, the officer arrested and charged for his part in the death of Floyd, was moved from the city jail in Minneapolis to another location. The gunfire that killed a black woman in Kentucky and wounded one of the plainclothes police detectives who crashed through her front door has fueled a debate over so-called no-knock warrants. More than 2 months after police fatally shot Breonna Taylor, the Louisville mayor has announced an indefinite suspension on the warrants that allow officers to enter a home without announcing their presence. The president says that he is designating Antifa as a domestic terrorism organization after another night of violent protest. Civil rights group protested President Trump's actions. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. It is 5:49 on Wall Street and live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Let's talk a little bit more about the president's response to the upheaval in this country, the potential political fallout here. Greg Vallier joins us now, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments. Good as always to talk with you, Greg. And of course, typically after the kind of weekend we've suffered through in this country, a president would perhaps make an address in the Oval Office or somewhere in the White House to try to calm the nation. What we've seen from President Trump, of course, has been a lot of tweets. What do you make of how the president has responded at this moment?
Well, it leaves a lot to be desired. You have to say that, whether you're on the left or right, and I think that he has to say something definitive today.
Well, what's interesting, though, is we heard from a number of mayors, Democratic mayors, including the leader of Atlanta and Washington, D.C., indicating that it might be better for the president not to say anything, given his response in the past to incidents like the Charlottesville unrest. What to make of those comments? Would it be better if the president, lived up to the old adage that if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all?
Yeah, he's hearing mixed messages from his advisors, according to reports this morning. Some feel he has to say something. Others realize he's not real good behind a teleprompter. And he may not have much to say. That actually he could provoke things, as he did over the weekend when he said that he would sick dogs on protesters.
And he has taken this sort of hard line response, as he often has in the past, to the protest. How does that potentially impact things politically for him to in a lot of ways, feed to his base with his reaction to this.
I think there are two huge implications of what's going on. The first is, I think we're going to get more cases of coronavirus. There was no social distancing, obviously, this weekend. But as far as Trump goes, I really do think that he is now in a fight for his presidency. The polls show him far behind. He didn't handle the virus well. He's not handling the urban riots well. And for him, politically, he needs a lifesaver, an economy that's going to get stronger. Yet on this Friday, we're going to get an unemployment number that will be close to 20%. So everywhere you look, his options are limited.
Yeah, you mentioned the prospects of the economic recovery. That had been what the president had been pinning his hopes for re-election on. Talk a little bit more about what all these protests, the possibility of it potentially adding to a second wave of infection, what that could mean for the economic recovery.
Well, I think it means a lot of people who are not going to the beach are going to say, no thanks, I'm going to stay home this summer, not going to go out to malls, not going to go to restaurants because it's not over yet. And I do think that all this horrible sights we've seen on TV over the weekend, one of the most horrible sights is the fact that everyone is jammed in together. And I think just simple logic would argue that we're going to get a spike in new cases.
Are you surprised that we haven't seen Joe Biden visible as much as you might expect at a moment like this? I know his campaign posted something on social media where he had gone out to the site of the protest in Wilmington, Delaware. But, in terms of putting out a national message, we haven't heard much from Biden at this moment either.
Well, we saw a few things. On Friday, he was fairly visible, but you're right. This weekend, he was not. I mean, he does need to be more of a force to show empathy, to show leadership. Maybe it's the old adage, if my opponent is imploding, I'm not going to get in the way. I mean, there's something to that, I would think. But no, he needs to be more visible, and I predict he will.
Do you see this moving polling nationally or even in some of the battleground states as this unrest continues?
Absolutely. I'd say Trump is trailing by 10 points, roughly, in most of the polls. Still not too late. I mean, Hillary Clinton was leading by about 10 4 years ago when she lost, so it's not hopeless for Trump. But I would say, Nathan, right now, as of today, the Democrats will take the White House, the House, and the Senate. Got a long way to go. A lot can change, but I think there's been that big a change just in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
That's a pretty big statement here. So in our last 30 seconds, what do you see happening as we go through the summer? I mean, obviously, this has been a fiery start to the summer.
Absolutely, and I think that you have to talk about law and order. Just in D.C., where I live, Georgetown got trashed. Every place is getting trashed. You can't talk about police reforms and healing until you get law and order. And you're hearing that from the mayor of Atlanta and the mayor of Chicago, two African Americans who realize you've got to get some control before you move on to the next part of the agenda.
All right, Greg Vallier, thank you as always. Greg Vallier is Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments. Karen?
All right, Nathan, thank you. We're coming up to 5:55 on Wall Street. It's time for our daily Bloomberg Law Brief, exploring legal issues in the news, brought to you by American Arbitration Association. International trade or business dispute, resolve faster with the International Center for Dispute Resolution, the leader in alternative dispute resolution around the world, ICDR.org. Today, we look at election officials having just weeks to ensure states can handle a surge of mail-in votes come November. States soon need to decide to buy new equipment to help sort, verify, and count mail-in ballots if they can afford it, or rely on staff to manually handle the crush of incoming mail. For more on the challenges, Bloomberg's June Grasso speaks to Richard Briffault, a professor at Columbia Law School.
So, Rich, it's about 5 months until Election Day. What would state or local officials have to do now to allow voting by mail in November?
Well, there's a mixture of legal and practical things that they have to do. The legal issues remain in those states that still require some kind of excuse for voting, such as a disability or an illness or being away. Most states no longer require that, and a number of states were forced to suspend that by the courts during the primary season this year. But I think there are still a number of states where the law on the books, at least for now, says you need to have an actual illness or disability rather than just the presence of the COVID pandemic itself. So that's kind of one set of issues, is the legal authority to allow basically nearly all people to vote by mail. In the other states, and this is most of the states now, it is legal for people to vote by mail without having to have an excuse. The issues are really practical. Getting the ballots designed, because a mail-in ballot will look different from a ballot you see on a voting machine. Getting them printed, getting the envelopes, getting them stuffed, getting the machines that you need to count mail-in ballots, which are different from the machines that are normally used to count ballots that are cast at a polling place. Some states maybe have even jumped over a step. In some states, you may be eligible to vote by mail, but you may have to fill out an application. So what's the process for getting those applications to people and getting those applications back to the county clerk or whoever is in charge of voting locally? So vote by mail is somewhat more complicated. There are more steps to it than traditional polling place voting. And just the mechanics of it are going to be different. A number of states have done it very successfully, but they transition to it over several election cycles. And basically what's going to happen is there are a lot of states where that transition is going to have to be very fast.
And that's Richard Briffault, a professor at Columbia Law School, speaking of Bloomberg's June Grasso. Catch more of that interview, plus analysis of the latest legal news, by listening to the Bloomberg Law Show at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, or downloading the show at Bloomberg.com/podcasts. And attorneys can find exceptional legal research and business development tools at BloombergLaw.com. S&P futures down 10 points this morning. Dow futures down 67. NASDAQ futures down 57. And the 10-year Treasury is little change. Yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. The euro 1.1113 against the dollar. Bloomberg Daybreak continues. This is Bloomberg.
Influential.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with Moonpig.com. Download the app now.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, pass to the 5, touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
This is Mike Golick Jr. from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Wingo Dad and I sit down and discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Monday, June 1st, 2020. Coming up this hour.
Protests hammer cities across the country following the death of George Floyd.
Violent clashes include vandalism, torch police cars, and thousands of arrests.
As tensions rise, President Trump meets with governors, law enforcement, and national security officials.
A 4th day of protests against police brutality kept New York City on edge. Plus, New Jersey will reopen sectors of the state from the coronavirus lockdown. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. NBA players react to the protests and a response to the baseball players as they try to make a labor deal with owners.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by Witham, a forward-thinking, technology-driven advisory and accounting firm helping clients be in a position of strength in today's modern business landscape. Visit Witham.com to learn more.
U.S. futures are slightly lower to start the week, 6:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 13 points, Dow futures down 91, NASDAQ futures down 65. No trading in Germany today. The CAC in Paris is up 0.9%, and so is the FTSE 100. 10-year Treasury, little change, yield 0.65%, yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1% or 36 cents at $35.14 a barrel. COMEX gold down 0.2% or $3.10 at $17.4860 an ounce. The euro 1.1114 against the dollar, the yen 107.61. This data check brought to you by SEI. Since its founding 50 years ago, SEI has provided investment managers and asset owners with robust infrastructure platforms and flexible outsourcing solutions. Go to SEIC.com/IMS. Nathan.
Karen, we're coming off the 6th day of protests in cities across the country. That's the sound of police in Minneapolis firing flashbangs last night to disperse protesters after the city's curfew went into effect. Meantime, in New York City, demonstrations continued for a 4th day. There were peaceful demonstrations across the city, interspersed with some violent clashes that included vandalism, torched police cars, and dozens of arrests. It was a similar scene in Boston. Peaceful rallies turned violent as protesters hit police with bottles, damaged vehicles, and looted stores throughout downtown Crossing and the Back Bay. Demonstrators took to the streets in dozens of cities, including Chicago and Los Angeles, to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer.
At the same time in Washington,
no peace! No peace!
Chants of no justice, no peace heard as part of demonstrations outside the White House. For the very latest, we bring in Amy Morris from our Bloomberg 99.1 Washington newsroom.
Angry protesters took over the streets of Washington, D.C. last night, some of them setting fires, vandalizing buildings and cars, and looting just blocks from the White House. Historic St. John's Church outside the White House was vandalized and set on fire. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser activated the National Guard. The Justice Department has now deployed the U.S. Marshals Service and agents from the Drug Enforcement Administration to supplement those National Guard troops outside the White House. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Amy, thank you. Unrest across the country took center stage on the Sunday talk shows.
Let's come together. Let's be prayerful, especially on a Sunday morning, about how we can put our differences aside, because this is the greatest country in the world, and we want to live up to the legacy of America.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on ABC's This Week, where we also heard from Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar.
We are living in a country that has a two-tiered justice system, and people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Omar says the latest examples of police brutality against African Americans are shocking but typical.
We are living in a country that has truly, for a long time, brutalized African Americans.
And President Trump's head of national security says the White House stands in solidarity with George Floyd. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien blames violent protests on Antifa, a loosely organized movement that is a frequent target of conservative critics.
It's the violent Antifa radical militants that are coming out under cover of night, traveling across state lines, using military-style tactics to burn down our cities. And they're especially targeting the most vulnerable parts of our cities.
Now, there were no public remarks from President Trump over the weekend, though he was active on Twitter, saying he'll label Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. He threatened protesters with tweets about vicious dogs and ominous weapons and blamed liberal governors and mayors for the unrest. The president plans to meet with Attorney General William Barr today before convening a teleconference with governors, law enforcement, and national security officials. There are currently no public remarks on the president's schedule.
The president's comments on Twitter are not helping the situation, according to D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser.
I think that the president has a responsibility to help calm the nation, and he can start by not sending divisive tweets that are meant to hearken to the segregationist past of our country.
Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Mayor Bowser singled out the president's tweet about vicious dogs as a reference to segregationists that let dogs out on women and children in the South. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms also took issue with the president's comments. She spoke on Face the Nation from CBS.
What I'd like to hear from the president is leadership, and I would like to hear
a genuine care and concern for our communities and where we are with race relations in America.
This week, Meet the Press and Face the Nation can all be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio.
Now, despite the protests, U.S. futures had been gaining overnight. Now they're lower after a Bloomberg News exclusive on the state of trade relations between the U.S. and China. Sources say the Chinese government is telling state-run agriculture companies to pause purchases of U.S. farm goods. The move is said to be tied to Beijing evaluating the ongoing escalation of tensions over Hong Kong.
At the same time, China is accusing the U.S. of undermining bilateral relations and, quote, disregarding facts when it comes to Hong Kong. Beijing says any words or actions that hurt China's interests will be met with firm counterattacks. Futures this morning are lower, with S&P futures down 10 points, Dow futures down 70, NASDAQ futures down 56, and NYMEX crude oil at $35.14 a barrel. Straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. It is 6:07 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Thousands of people marched in New York City yesterday over the death of George Floyd. Many protesters and officers tried to keep the peace after days of unrest that left police cars burned and hundreds of people under arrest. However, last night, some stores were looted, including high-end stores in Soho. The NYPD believes violence has been deliberately stirred up by outside groups trying to hijack the protests. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo called for protesters to use common sense.
That violence never works. How many protests have we had? How many nights have we gone through like last night?
Over 30 NYPD officers were hurt over the weekend. Cuomo says the National Guard is on standby. Yesterday, thousands of people marched through multiple neighborhoods, chanting, kneeling in the street, and falling silent for a minute in front of the police station in Times Square to remember the people killed by police. Mayor Bill de Blasio says he has no plans to impose a curfew.
When you add up how many things were happening in how many places all over this city, it says something about New York City. It says something about the people of New York City. It says something about the NYPD, that thank God there was no loss of life. There were no major injuries.
De Blasio also reacted to a video of two police cruisers plowing into protesters in Brooklyn, saying, "I didn't like what I saw one bit." Among the hundreds of protesters arrested over the weekend was Mayor de Blasio's 25-year-old daughter. Chiara de Blasio was arrested for unlawful assembly with a group of protesters at 12th Street near Broadway. She was given a desk appearance ticket. The number of COVID-19 cases in New York State continues to decline. Governor Cuomo.
Net change in hospitalizations down again, intubations down again, number of new deaths still dropping.
There were 56 new deaths reported in New York State from the coronavirus. In New Jersey, more businesses in the state under lockdown can begin reopening soon. The governor said horse racing can begin as soon as next week, while child care centers can open on June 15th. In Connecticut, hair salons and barbershops are reopening today. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thanks, Michael. 6:09 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashauer.
All right, Nathan, it's the start of a big week if baseball is to come to an agreement on how much players should make in a shortened season without fans. Last week was the owner's proposal, loudly panned by players who are now making their pitch back. The details do not sound like something that will lead to a deal. They want full pay for the games being played. They admit pay for those making $10 million a year and more can be deferred, but only if the postseason can't be played, and the payback should come with interest. They say if a player chooses not to play due to concerns about the virus, they should still get paid. They want more games, expanded playoffs for 2021 as well. They pitch ideas to make baseball more popular, like an off-season all-star game and players mic'd up during games. But if there are no games in 2020 because of money, baseball figures to become significantly less popular in the years ahead. Some athletes part of the weekend-long protest. The Celtics' Jaylen Brown drove 15 hours to his native Georgia to protest in Atlanta. Michael Jordan, for so long criticized for not speaking out about non-basketball issues, released a statement, said he's pained, saddened, and angry. Thabo Sefolosha of the Houston Rockets said George Floyd could have been him. Sefolosha in 2015 was wrongly attacked by New York police outside a Manhattan nightclub. They broke his leg. He sued. settled for $4 million. NASCAR, Bristol, Tennessee. The winner, just like last week, Brad Keselowski. That's because the leaders, Chase Elliott and Joey Logano, crashed with a lap to go. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
And John, this would have been a big week in the sports world. In addition to the NBA and NHL playoffs, the final leg of racing's Triple Crown was supposed to have happened on Saturday, but for the coronavirus. Instead, the Belmont Stakes will be the Triple Crown's first race this year. It'll take place June 20th with no fans. The second week of the French Open would have had fourth-round matches, quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals all this week. S&P futures lower by 8 points. Dow futures down 47. So are NASDAQ futures. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Hey, y'all. Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
If you have to drive, then it's more important than ever to watch your speed. As London starts to reopen, there are going to be more people on our streets. There'll be more people cycling, more people walking to work or to the shops. If you must drive, avoid the morning and evening peaks when the roads will be busier. We want the streets to be safe for everyone, all the time. So watch your speed. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
We're Cadent. Keeping you and our people safe is our main focus, and our vital work must continue. You'll start to see more of us in your area as we increase our work to upgrade the gas pipes to keep the energy flowing into your homes and businesses. We may need to come into your home to complete this work, but rest assured our engineers are following all government guidance on PPE and social distancing. We continue to provide the critical gas emergency service, and if you smell gas, call 0800 111 999. To all other key workers, we would like to say a big thank you from everyone at Cadent. Cadent, your gas network.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath, or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway, or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage. Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
People's Postcode Lottery's 30k a day is back. £30,000 will be won every single day by players in the July draws. That's £30,000 for every player in the winning postcode. Visit postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 18th of June to play in the July draws. EPL managed lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus conditions apply. Play responsibly.
From From Bloomberg Television, here's David Inglis.
The world is waiting and also watching as biotech companies are racing towards a coronavirus vaccine. Now, these companies face huge profits if they succeed, one of which, we're talking about Novavax, and have a look at the company's stock. Charge this one to hindsight, by the way. There we go. So the company's now started testing it on people, and the company has seen, as quite evidence here, it's quite a massive stock surge here. We spoke with the CEO, Stan Erck, earlier.
Like the other vaccine manufacturers, we are all going as fast as we possibly can. And this is, as U.S. government set up a warp speed program, we're using warp speed. If we go into, as I say, our expectation is we'll go into a phase 2 trial, but the phase 2 trial will be designed to be a phase 2/3, so that you can actually see efficacy. And the expectation is that we'll do it in multiple countries. We'll do it in Australia, U.S., and likely in a couple other countries in August. And by somewhere in the October-November timeframe, we would expect to be able to see efficacy. And that could lead governments, the FDA and EMA in Europe, to conclude that the vaccine might be deployable.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. U.S. stock index futures are falling after Chinese officials told agriculture companies to pause imports of some American farm goods. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 7.5 points. Dow futures down 48. NASDAQ futures down 45. European shares are climbing along with the euro, with the FTSE 100 is up 1.1%. The CAC in Paris is up 1.1%. And there's no trading in Germany today. 10-year Treasury down 1/32 yield 0.65%. Yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1.25% or 44 cents at $35.05 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.25% or $4.70 at $17.46.90 an ounce. The euro 1.1109 against the dollar. British pound 1.2383 and the yen 107.69. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, tens of thousands of protesters have again taken to the streets across America. Peaceful demonstrations yesterday against police killings of black people have been overshadowed by unrest that quickly ravaged cities from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. A truck driver drove into demonstrators in Minneapolis, where George Floyd died after a white police officer put his knee on his neck for more than 8 minutes. Outside the White House, police fired tear gas and stun grenades into a crowd who lit fires in a street. Thieves in more than 20 California cities smashed into businesses and ran off with cell phones and TVs. Atlanta's mayor says 2 police officers have been fired and 3 others placed on desk duty over excessive use of force during a weekend protest incident. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. It's 6:19 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak, and Jim Paulson is with us now, Chief Investment Officer at Luthold Whedon Capital Management. It's interesting, Jim, as trading began overnight, investors appeared to be looking past all the unrest in the United States until that report came from Bloomberg News this morning that China is considering a pause on U.S. farm imports. What do you make of the market focus at this moment?
A lot of issues going on, Nathan. It's just unbelievable. But I really think that when you take the economy down, I don't know what GDP will be in the second quarter, but down 30% or 40% or who knows what the numbers will be, and the unemployment rate approaches 20%. The biggest thing in the room has got to be what's going on around the economy being turned off or being turned back on. And I really think that you look at all the issues that are going on right now, you wonder why the market is holding in here at all. But I think that's because there's such a big issue with the economy being turned back on. The virus curve has been bent, nearly everywhere across the globe at the moment. And we're starting to see economic activities restart. Now they've been set back with the protests, but nonetheless, there's restart going on. And you can see the economic data starting to bounce here, and even in China, giving an early example of how fast it could bounce. And I think that's keeping a bit under this stock market, even though it's facing so many issues far beyond the shutdown of the economy, to Chinese unrest and to American unrest across American cities. So I think it's still mostly about the economy going into a deep fall and coming back out of it.
Of course, a lot of this unrest is happening right at your doorstep. You're based in Minneapolis, and now with all these protests happening, it's raising the possibility that we could exacerbate the potential for a second wave of infection with protesters, particularly ones in some of the demographics hardest hit by this pandemic, getting out in close proximity. I mean, what does this mean for the potential for an economic recovery here?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, we watch massive crowds that are abandon social distancing. There's no doubt about that going on. So I don't. It'll be hard to know what the impact of that will be down the road here, whether we'll have another virus outbreak. I also wonder if it's just seasonal a little bit here too, Nathan, where going into the summer, the virus calms down a bit. And we may be seeing that across the country right now, and maybe it'll come back in the fall. I would say this, though. I think that the hospital capacity and the ability of the country to respond to a respike in viruses again is much improved from what it was when it first showed up. And also, we know sort of where the lethality of this virus is among older individuals and those with health compromises, and I think we can be more protective of that and put a ring around that. So I really think we're better equipped at this point to handle a respike in virus. I'm not sure, while it wouldn't be good, I'm not sure it would necessarily completely shut down the economy again.
Are you advising your clients to do anything differently with their investments, given all the exogenous factors out there right now?
Well, I think there's two things that can be tilted on the bullish side here, primarily. Mm-hmm. There still is just a high level of fear, anxiousness, which tells me that there's a lot of portfolios that are underinvested in risk, overinvested in defensive assets like cash and bonds and gold. And that is typically a good thing for the stock market. Whenever you are in the midst of a recession, if you knew you were in a recession, it was almost always a good time to buy stocks. And whenever there's great fear about the future, they're probably discounting the more positive outcomes. And then we have just massive policy support, which just goes on unrelenting in the background, from monetary and fiscal stimulus to extremely low interest rates. I think you have to continue to remain tilted bullishly. So I think it's a barbell approach right now, and equity portfolios make sense. Stay with the new era kind of high growth companies, but on weak market days, add some more cyclicality, small cap, cyclical sector, and international stocks.
All right, Jim. Thank you as always, and stay safe, please. Jim Paulson is Chief Investment Officer at Luthold Wheaton Capital Management, based out of Minneapolis. Futures this morning are moving lower, and you are listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Protests across the U.S. are throwing a wrench into plans to reopen following coronavirus-related shutdowns. Violence prompted companies from Apple to Amazon and Target to limit operations, while Chicago may delay reopening of businesses planned for Wednesday. The extra cost of police overtime and damages also deal another blow to already strained government finances. Demonstrations across U.S. cities followed the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Goldman Sachs is rolling back its pessimistic outlook for U.S. stocks brought on by the pandemic, giving up on its call for another steep sell-off. Strategists dialed back their prediction that the S&P 500 was slumped to the 2,400 level, more than 20% below Friday's close. They now see the current slump to hit 2,750 and say the S&P could even rally further to 3,200. Dow futures slightly lower to kick off the new month. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
For the Jewish you know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
At Lloyds Bank, we know that money is a concern for a lot of people during this time.
I'm really worried about the business. I'm worrying about you. And I think that's changing me. And I'm worried that somewhere along the line you might not love me anymore.
Oh, that's not true. Whatever's playing on your mind at the moment, Lloyds Bank, in partnership with Mental Health UK, can offer you support and advice. Visit lloydsbank.com/mentalhealth.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out here.
Yeah, well, just...
Carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with a Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
It's 6:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. We are just about 3 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date in the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are lower after the 6th day of protests in cities across the country. Police in Minneapolis fired flashbangs last night to disperse protesters after the city's curfew went into effect. Meantime, in New York City, demonstrations continued for a 4th day. There were peaceful demonstrations across the country, interspersed with violent clashes. Demonstrators took to the streets in dozens of cities, including Chicago and L.A., to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer.
Chicago planned to lift coronavirus restrictions this week, but that may be delayed now due to the protests. Demonstrations are adding to what's already a tense environment in many parts of the country. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker.
We have communities all around the state that are desperately trying to recover from the damage that this virus has done. And I'm imploring people to not force a difficult second rebuilding on our small businesses in the course of expressing your very justified pain.
Chicago was set to start reopening Wednesday. Now, Mayor Lori Lightfoot is consulting with officials to reconsider the plan.
Despite the protests, U.S. futures had been gaining overnight. Now they're lower after a Bloomberg News exclusive on the state of trade relations between the U.S. and China. Sources say the Chinese government is telling state-run agriculture companies to pause purchases of U.S. farm goods. The move is said to be tied to Beijing evaluating the ongoing escalation of tensions over Hong Kong.
At the same time, China is accusing the U.S. of undermining bilateral relations and, quote, disregarding facts when it comes to Hong Kong. President Trump last week moved to rescind the city's special trading status. China says the measure would gravely interfere with China's internal affairs. Beijing says any words or actions that hurt China's interests will be met with firm counterattacks.
And again, futures are lower this morning with S&P futures down 7.5 points, Dow futures down 42, NASDAQ futures down 49. No trading in Germany today. The FTSE 100 is up 1.1%, and the CAC in Paris up 1.2%. 10-year Treasury, little change, yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year, 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9%.
Bob Moon. All right, Bob, thanks. Now some other stories we're following. The finance industry in New York City won't recover from the coronavirus for 6 years. That's according to a new study from software firm ThinkIQ, which ranks U.S. employment markets. The New York area has lost about 8% of its finance jobs this year. It hit a peak of more than 800,000 last August. Senior Facebook employees are criticizing Mark Zuckerberg. They went on Twitter to express their unhappiness that the CEO is not taking action on incendiary comments President Trump has posted on their social network. Last week, the president posted a Facebook message saying, quote, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Zuckerberg says he didn't slap a warning on it because people need to know if the government is planning military action. And Goldman Sachs says the U.S. labor market is showing the earliest signs of recovery. In a report to clients, economist John Hotzius wrote a drop in continued jobless claims, especially in states that reopened earlier than others, suggests rehiring by businesses may be starting to turn the tide. Futures are moving lower, pointing to a lower open on Wall Street this morning. S&P futures down 5 points, Dow futures down 24, NASDAQ futures down 47 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's BABBEL.com.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuit look at luxury.
We're Cadent. Keeping you and our people safe is our main focus, and our vital work must continue. You'll start to see more of us in your area as we increase our work to upgrade the gas pipes to keep the energy flowing into your homes and businesses. We may need to come into your home to complete this work, but rest assured our engineers are following all government guidance on PPE and social distancing. We continue to provide the critical gas emergency service, and if you smell gas, call 0800 111 999. To all other key workers, we would like to say a big thank you from everyone at Cadent. Cadent, your gas network.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with moonpig.com. Download the app now.
Be part of the sports conversation with Sports Talk Radio on TuneIn. Join the discussion around your favorite local teams with sports stations broadcasting in your area.
The game will be 185 to 183 and somebody wins, whatever. Football, it's either full go or it's not. You got like, oh, it's thud. I can practice what they call
Follow
thud.
national storylines and debates with ESPN Radio.
Does the NBA have a hiring problem when it comes to front office jobs in the leagues and a minority hiring issue? Stephen A. chimed in on that today on First Take.
It also resonates with me, Max. You can appreciate this position. One of the candidates was Brian Colangelo. We know what happened. I like Brian, but we know.
And hear what's happening worldwide with international channels like Talk Sport.
Seems as I'm sort of doing my life in reverse at the moment. I was on cricket tours when I was 20 years old, and now I'm 31. I'm out sat at home injured playing PlayStation. So it's a tournament basically where you create your own character.
In your backyard and around the globe. Keep your finger on the pulse of the sports world with TuneIn. Of news and financial information 24 hours a day. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
Special report, protests and violence. These sounds from New York City in its fourth day of protests against police brutality. A similar scene played out in many large U.S. cities. In Washington, D.C., Congress is reacting.
South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican in the U.S. Senate, says there's no denying what happened to George Floyd.
Thank God for video.
He spoke on Fox News Sunday as the nation saw protests erupt in Minneapolis, where Floyd died in a police-involved action that shocked the nation. Protests also broke out in cities from coast to coast, including in the nation's capital. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tells ABC's This Week what happened to George Floyd is inexcusable.
I said right at the start that it was murder. We saw an execution of a person on TV.
Linda Kenyon, Washington.
Sunday capped a tumultuous weekend and month that saw city and state officials deploy thousands of National Guard soldiers. I'm John Trout.
They don't just talk to the most important people.
Is it as ominous this time around?
They talk with the most interesting people.
Are they taking this seriously?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. This update brought to you by Stevens Institute of Technology. Be a leader in the digital transformation of any business sector with an online master's degree or graduate certificate in information systems. Visit stevens.edu/infosystems. U.S. stock index futures are lower after Chinese officials told agriculture companies to pause imports of some American farm goods. S&P futures down 5 points, Dow futures down 30, NASDAQ futures down 42. The FTSE 100 is up 1.1%. 10-year Treasury down 1/32, yield 0.65%, yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.7% or 26 cents at $35.23 a barrel, and COMEX gold is down 0.25% or $4.20 at $17.4760 an ounce. The euro 1.1107 against the dollar, the yen 107.72. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, protests have swept the United States in the last 6 days in the wake of George Floyd's death at the hands of police in Minnesota. Derek Chauvin, the officer arrested and charged for his part in the death of Floyd, was moved from the city jail in Minneapolis to another location. President Trump says that he was designating Antifa as a domestic terrorism organization after another night of violent protests. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thanks. We're live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. We're at 6:48 on Wall Street. Time to check what's going on in D.C., one of dozens of cities that have turned into scenes of upheaval as protests over the police killing of a black man in Minneapolis boil over. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi reacted to the death of George Floyd on ABC's This Week.
We saw an execution of a person on TV. We saw it happen. A knee to the neck.
White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien was on the same program. He says outside militant groups are taking advantage of the protests.
This is being driven by Antifa, and they did it in Seattle. They've done it in Portland. They've done it in Berkeley. This is a destructive force of radical. I don't even know if you want to call them leftists, whatever they are. They're militants who are coming in and burning our cities, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
President Trump warned on Twitter that he'll label Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. He also threatened protesters outside the White House with tweets about vicious dogs and ominous weapons. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser tells NBC's Meet the Press the president should be trying to calm the nation.
And he can start by not sending divisive tweets that are meant to hearken to the segregationist past of our country.
Meet the Press, and This Week can be heard every Sunday on Bloomberg Radio, along with Fox News Sunday and CBS's Face the Nation. On This Morning After, we're joined by Bloomberg U.S. Politics editor Kathleen Hunter. And, it's remarkable to hear from the mayor of the nation's capital rebuking the president for his rhetoric. We also heard on that show from the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, essentially saying, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. It's a pretty extraordinary statement from mayors to a president of the United States.
Yes, absolutely, Nathan. And I think that what we're really seeing here is, some increased acrimony, between these heads of local government and the president, given how the president has approached these protests that we've seen really take off over the weekend in basically every major U.S. city. So I think it's not surprising that the mayors that are dealing directly with these protests are, hitting back the way that they are, especially given what Trump's rhetoric has been and the criticism by some, I think, of Trump's rhetoric, which, people say is actually potentially doing more to kind of incite the violence or at least incite the unrest than to really try to quell it.
I don't know if there's any more stark mental image than the one we heard just this morning from Amy Morris in our Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom of fires reported at St. John's Church, the Church of Presidents, right across the street from the White House, just part of the major violence we've seen, as you mentioned, in cities across this country. What can we expect to happen further, given that what we've heard from the president so far, at least seen on his Twitter feed, is to take such a hard line?
Yeah, I think there's not a real reason to think that things are going to calm down, anytime soon. It seems like the president's strategy has been to kind of continue to keep this an issue in some ways, potentially to even fan the flames. We saw that even from his designation of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization last night, a move that I think really amounts to being pretty much a symbolic move. There's a lot of sense that that's not going to have a whole lot of practical consequence. But, it does kind of underscore the Trump administration's response here, which has been to characterize these protests as being fueled by, far left extremist groups. We saw Attorney General William Barr giving a press conference on Saturday to that effect. And I think that is going to do very little, to say the least, to kind of calm down what's gone on over the weekend. And so I think that it's hard to imagine that, this week is going to bring any kind of swift resolution, and we could see these types of protests continue.
And it harks in a lot of ways back to what we heard from the president in the 2016 campaign, taking a hard line, and that inaugural speech about American carnage. And before that, the president positioning himself as the person who alone can fix it. Although it's a lot different now to be able to say that as you're coming into office, as opposed to trying to hold on to an office in a typical reelection campaign, you'd be trying to build on the positives. And it doesn't seem at this moment like there are many.
Well, and I think that is a sort of facet of Trump's presidency that we've seen time and time again, is when he feels as though he's a bit on the ropes. We see him going back to his 2016 playbook, whether that means, limiting, taking a harder line, at least rhetorically, or if not policy-wise, on immigration, or picking fights with China. We tend to see him, go back to those aspects of his 2016 campaign, those campaign planks of his platform that worked for him that time around. I think it's similar when it comes to this issue. We saw him in 2016 in his acceptance speech at the Republican convention declare himself the law and order president. I think that is what he's really kind of going back to and placing emphasis on in terms of his approach to these protests. But as you point out, it is a different equation when you've been in office for 3.5 years than when you're casting yourself as an outsider who can come in and fix all this. It's a lot harder to say that, there's this, in 2016, this argument was always kind of cloaked in the idea that the Obama administration had failed on these points. And so I think that, whether this strategy works for Trump this time around remains a very, very open question.
Does this take some attention, though, off the response to the coronavirus that the president had taken a lot of criticism for in the past, particularly in his rhetoric toward the pandemic?
Well, I think it certainly can, and I think certainly that's going to be the Trump administration's hope right now, or the White House's hope right now, is that this does deflect some attention away from Trump's coronavirus response, which, has been pretty widely panned. I think it's important to remember that, these protests are happening at a time and have really taken over the news narrative at a time when, 1,000 Americans on average are still dying daily from the coronavirus. And so I think that, if you're the Trump administration or, if you're Trump campaign advisors and looking at the reelection, if that's your focus, then I think that talking about anything other than the coronavirus and the Americans that are dying and the people that have lost their jobs is definitely, a smart strategy. And so I think that is part of at least part of what's happening here is we're seeing, kind of this focus by Trump campaign advisors and Trump himself on, talking about something other than the virus.
All right. Thank you, as always, Kate. That's Bloomberg U.S. politics editor Kathleen Hunter. And you could read much more on all this at Bloomberg.com or on the Bloomberg terminal. Follow all the latest on Bloomberg Radio in Washington, Bloomberg 99.1 and 105.7 FM HD2. Karen.
Nathan, thank you. It is 6:55 on Wall Street. It's time for the Bloomberg NJIT STEM Report. It's brought to you by New Jersey Institute of Technology and the NJ Scholar Corps program, incentivizing residents who attend college out of state to come home and finish their degree in New Jersey. Learn more at njit.edu/NJ. Come home. Now, with what's making news in science, technology, engineering, and math, here's John Tucker.
For the first time, humans have traveled to a commercially developed spacecraft. 2 American astronauts boarded the International Space Station from a SpaceX capsule, forging a new era for NASA and Elon Musk. The Dragon craft carrying the 2 astronauts arrived at the orbiting lab at 10:16 a.m. Eastern Time Sunday, about 19 hours after lifting off from the Kennedy Space Center. Now, the milestone flight is the first American astronauts have flown from U.S. soil since the Space Shuttle program ended in 2011. The achievement comes 18 19 years after Musk founded Space Exploration Technologies with the ultimate goal of populating other planets. And Apple is set to reopen its biggest stores in Japan from midday on Wednesday, bringing its physical retail network back online in one of its biggest markets. Shuttered at the coronavirus outbreak forced a series of restricted measures across the country. Apple stores in 3 shopping districts are reopening their doors this week. And a scientific team exploring underwater canyons off the coast of Western Australia recently discovered a gigantic swirling sea creature that measured at least 150 feet long. According to the New York Times, it's a symphophore, an organism made up of millions of tiny clones clustered together in colonies that form one mega animal. And that is today's Bloomberg NJIT STEM report. Karen.
All right, John, thank you. S&P futures down 3 points this morning. Dow futures down 2. NASDAQ futures down 36, so they are trimming their declines. The 10-year Treasury down 2/32, yield 0.65%. Straight ahead, it's Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrell, and Lisa Abramowitz. For Nathan Hager, I'm Karen Moscow, and this is Bloomberg.
Influential conversations from...
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs. Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
We're all in uncharted territory looking for ways to support our communities. At Dell Technologies, we're making sure small businesses have the right tech solutions. Dell Technologies advisors are here for you, helping small businesses stay connected and productive while working remotely. With Windows 10 Pro and Microsoft Teams, we're standing by you every step of the way. Call us today on 0800 169 1745. That's 0800 169 1745.
Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown to a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
It's hard enough to forecast where the economy is going to be going over the next several months or quarters. Forecasting what potential output will be in the next several years is even harder.
This is not your father's or even your grandfather's IMF.
The most we can hope for, I think, out of D.C. is a pumping of the brakes and slowing down action on U.S.-China escalation.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrell, and Lisa Abramowitz.
From New York City, for our audience worldwide, good morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance with equity futures on another planet. We're live on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio. Alongside Tom Keene, I'm Jonathan Farrell, together with Lisa Abramowitz. This is Bloomberg. And Tom, I've got to say, I really struggle to think of a time when this equity market was more detached from the mood of this country.
There's no question about that, and I guess it's no surprise. We've seen it many, many times before, John. We see it with a little bit of dollar churn today, but you're absolutely correct. And, of course, we've ebbed and away just in the last 2 hours or so. The events over the weekend, John, are absolutely extraordinary, and they are original and unique versus other times of unrest in this nation.
And the events of the week to come will be extraordinary as well. Tom, it's remarkable to see the tension in this country and see an equity market that is totally unchanged at 7 a.m. Eastern, 2 hours and 30 minutes away from the opening bell. And as we count people down to that payrolls report this coming Friday, Tom, we're approaching 20% on unemployment too.
I'm glad you bring that up, John. My recalculation here over the weekend from research notes is 17 to 18% unemployment, and then they model out above that other countable people who get you out to 21 to 22% unemployment. And as Francine mentioned, the McKinsey report in the last hour, John, among Black Americans, unemployment could be well above 30%.
Lisa, a tense weekend behind us and an important week still to come.
Yeah, there's a tension right now between improving economic data and the backdrop that's really bleak of rising unemployment rates that have decimated certain communities in U.S. town we're talking about. What I'm looking at today, we're going to be getting ISM manufacturing data at 10 a.m. Wall Street time. People looking for any signs of improvement underneath that. Then, of course, there's the ECB coming out on Thursday, expected to expand their bond purchasing program, as well as their efforts to stimulate the economy. And Friday is that pivotal U.S. jobs report for the month of May, an expected unemployment rate of 20%. And this is not independent of what we're seeing in terms of the tensions that are boiling over. I think Mark Zandi over at Moody's really put it the way. I think people are coming to the realization that their jobs may not be coming back or coming back quickly. This is all conflating with racial tensions and completely boiling over. It was a very difficult weekend, and it's going to be a very difficult few weeks going forward, John.
Tom, put it all together, it's absolutely remarkable, and thank you, Lisa. Unemployment approaching 20% this coming Friday, the relationship between China and the United States breaking down, and real tensions, historical tensions, deeply rooted in American history coming to the surface once again. And S&P 500 futures are totally unchanged. We'll spend all morning talking about this on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio, but Tom, I have to say, it is quite remarkable.
Well, it's quite remarkable to see the market, but I'm going to say this again, John. I've seen this disconnect between finance and investment over social unrest and the social good of the nation. What will be far more importantly, and I know, John, we've got a whole series of guests up to inform on this, and hopefully in a Bloomberg way where we're not as strident as some of the other networks. But I think, John, what is so important here to understand, it's the leadership forward in the political space that then maybe will affect upon the markets.
It's a familiar feeling over the last several months where it's almost embarrassing to quote equity futures on a morning like this. I've said that so many times over the last several months. We can start the conversations this morning with Kevin Cirilli down in Washington, D.C. Kevin, will we hear from the President of the United States today?
Yes, and in fact, the president is going to be meeting with Attorney General William Barr later this morning in the 10 o'clock hour, Jonathan, and then we'll have a teleconference call with governors from around the country and national security officials from around the country as America wakes up to scenes of unrest and, unfortunately, riots that played out from Boston to Santa Monica. Here in Washington, D.C., just outside of the White House, where the riots really erupted, and there were several clashes with Secret Service agents as well as police officials. Like other cities, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, imposing a curfew of 11 p.m. last night. Unclear if that's going to continue for tonight, though it is expected. I spoke with a senior source yesterday on Joe Biden's presidential campaign and asked how the Biden campaign would be dealing with this. And what this source told me, Jonathan, was that he is going to likely continue to be making appearances at peaceful protests and at the same time calling for there to be some type of criminal justice reform, significant reform. You'll think back to the conversations that we've had right here on this program about economic stimulus over the next couple of weeks. I'm told that the next vehicle that could come through is now very likely going to have to include some type of reform to address the killing of George Floyd. This is a significant moment in civil rights history as well as a significant moment in American politics that is divorced entirely of the economic reality on Wall Street.
For our international audience here on TV and radio, and also, of course, for all of you waking up across this nation, the imagery of Lafayette Park north of the White House. Kevin, to be clear here, they turned the lights out at the White House for a security reason. There was unrest at Lafayette Park, but as you mentioned on civil rights, this is not 1968, way up 14th Street, past U Street in Washington. What's the distinction that you observed in the unrest in Washington overnight versus other protests and riot we've seen?
You know, you mentioned 14th Street, a historic African-American, which has a very rich African-American history in the city of Washington, D.C. You cross town about a mile by the White House, go to the historic National Mall where the Washington Monument, the World War II Memorial, as well as other memorials, they have been graffitied. and the images of America's national monuments, historical monuments, where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, to see the graffiti of Black Lives Matter imprinted on those monuments is an image that no doubt will be remembered for years to come.
Yeah. Kevin, so far the president has taken a pretty partisan approach in terms of his rhetoric, coming out with a series of tweets ranging with accusations against the media as well as Antifa, saying that he was going to designate it as a terrorist organization. Is there any pushback from Republicans saying that the president should take a page from the traditional playbook in this type of situation of taking a more bipartisan tone in terms of addressing the nation?
Yes, there is. And in fact, I spoke with several Republican staffers and including a re-election campaign official over the weekend who, quite frankly, I would describe their mood as uncomfortable, to put it mildly, with the response coming from the president. We saw this response after Charlottesville. Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida, in the last 24 hours, Lisa, tweeting out, and you mentioned Antifa, tweeting out that the riots and the looting and the fires that were set were carried out by, according to the senator's words, Antifa terrorists. This as the president, as you mentioned, tweeting out yesterday that Antifa he has labeled a terrorist organization. Susan Rice, who is an African-American and also the former President Barack Obama's national security advisor, speaking on CNN over the weekend and saying that she believes that there could be foreign adversaries, including Russia, that have fueled the rioting aspect of these protests. She also said that she would be comfortable with labeling Antifa a terrorist organization. She is a prominent Democrat voice in Democratic national security circles. So I think I say all of this because I think that over the next 24 to 48 hours, it's going to be imperative on behalf of the administration and Democrats to get to a point to separate out the violence from the peaceful protests.
Kevin, always great to get your thoughts on this program. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Kevin Cirilli there on the events of the last weekend. And Tom, Kevin's right to draw a distinction between the peaceful protests across much of this country and the protests that in some places turned into riots, elements of which were largely attributed to the radical left-wing organization Antifa. And I use the word organization loosely because there is no centralized organization, which makes it difficult, really difficult to police. And I think a big question this morning is how Washington and White House specifically plans to do that, Tom.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see on that organization as well. Joining us now, Greg Brower, of course, former congressional staff member for the FBI. We're thrilled he could join us this morning. Greg, I want you to define for this America, for those listening coast to coast, the modern phrase law and order. It's not Richard Nixon's law and order. It's not George Wallace's law and order. It's not even LBJ's law and order. What does law and order mean in this 2020?
Well, what it should mean is an effective law enforcement that is constitutionally based and is community engaged and is very different from some of the examples that we've seen recently that have caused this protest activity. This is, to be sure, these are exceptions to the rule. These exceptions involving excessive force and unnecessary violence on the part of law enforcement. It is not; those incidents do not reflect law enforcement generally, but clearly there are enough examples of such conduct that it needs to be addressed in a way that it has not been addressed thus far. And we're seeing some high-profile recent incidents causing the kind of social unrest and protest activity that we've experienced over the weekend. And so clearly it's a problem, it's a serious issue, and it has to be addressed.
Well, Greg, let's talk about it, because I know this is something you've given a lot of thought to. How do we more effectively police the police? How do we do that, Greg?
Well, there has to be effective training, obviously. Clearly, recent examples tell us that the training has to be improved. It has to be better. It has to be more comprehensive in large departments and small police departments around the country. There also has to be more effective oversight, apparently, when incidents like the one we saw over last week in Minneapolis happen. There has to be robust investigative activity. There has to be robust oversight, and there has to be accountability. I think one thing that can happen is that the federal Department of Justice can, in the form of the DOJ Office of Inspector General, can perhaps play a bigger role in overseeing the way that DOJ grant money is spent by local departments, the way training is done. But there really obviously has to be a much more effective training and oversight and accountability. Those are the three things that I would focus on.
Greg, just real quick here, what's your sense of how close we are to truly spiraling out of control where we're going to need a heavier military response?
Well, this is a very alarming situation, to say the least. We have now more than half of our states that have imposed curfews and have deployed the National Guard. This is the most significant such effort in our country since 1968. And so it's the violence that is going on. You know, we have a sort of a combination here of legitimate protest activity for obvious reasons, but we also have a lot of opportunistic, mindless violence, graffiti, attacks on the media, et cetera, and that obviously is not tolerable, and so it's a very, very challenging situation for our political leaders at the federal, state, and local level right now, to be sure.
Greg, fantastic to get your thoughts on a programme. We'll have to have a longer conversation next time around. That was Greg Brauer there weighing in on the situation that has dominated the United States for much of the past week. From New York City this morning, good morning to you all. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Influential.
We're Cadent. Keeping you and our people safe is our main focus, and our vital work must continue. You'll start to see more of us in your area as we increase our work to upgrade the gas pipes to keep the energy flowing into your homes and businesses. We may need to come into your home to complete this work, but rest assured our engineers are following all government guidance on PPE and social distancing. We continue to provide the critical gas emergency service, and if you smell gas, call 0800 111 999. To all other key workers, we would like to say a big thank you from everyone at Cadent. Cadent, your gas network.
People's Postcode Lottery's 30k a day is back.
£30,000 will be won every single day by players in the July draws. That's £30,000 for every player in the winning postcode. Visit postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 18th of June to play in the July draws. PPL managed lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus conditions apply. Play responsibly.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
It was maddening to think that anybody would destroy property, put our officers in danger, and put themselves in danger. And while we understand and protect their right to protest, not to destroy the city.
Mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, weighing in on some incredible events over the weekend in the United States of America. The mood of this country totally divorced from what we see in the price action through much of this Monday morning. Let's get to that price action right now. In your equity market, we're up 3 points on the S&P 500, positive 0.1%. Sometimes the price action just feels wrong, and it feels wrong this morning. In the bond market, 10-year Treasury yield shaping up as follows. A 10-year yield up a basis point to 0.66%. And in foreign exchange, the story for you across G10, a slightly weaker dollar, a slightly firmer euro. Alongside Tom Keane, I'm Jonathan Ferro, together with Lisa Abramowitz. This is Bloomberg Surveillance, live on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio. A remarkable set of events over the last week, Tom, and a market, I said it at the top of the program, a market that just feels like it's on another planet this morning.
Well, maybe economics, finance, investment, certainly finance and investment, John, a little bit removed, but we are going to continue forward with our coverage from Washington on the policies forward and, of course, across the nation with our First Word News. But we're also going to speak to experts on now what as we touch June 1st of this historic year. Michael Shaul has a wonderful historic perspective. He is with Marketfield Asset Management. Michael, the investment view forward from June 1 is radically different than it was from December 31. As you recalibrate for June, what is your number one theme?
I think we want to see whether or not some of the sort of strength and cyclicals that have started to appear in the last few weeks, can really be extended, and whether it can broaden into, we've had a lot of leadership from the precious metals, from gold. Looks like silver might finally be part of that. And what you'd really want to see is some of the traditional industrial metals beyond iron ore show signs of life. So that's what I'd look for at the beginning of June.
Michael, it is hard to be bullish for a whole host of reasons at the moment. How difficult is it for you to be constructive on this market?
Parts of it, it's quite difficult. I think that we're sort of back in heavy over enthusiasm for a lot of technology. But I do think that there's a good portion of the global equity market, mostly it's its cyclical portion, which is not expensive. And where, I think that just the sheer amount of liquidity, both at the level of money supply, but also at the level of fiscal injections, I think give you some hope going forward. It's clearly not the easiest time to be bullish. It's harder than, say, March 09 or May 09. But markets are strange things, and you throw a few $1 trillion their way, it does tend to have an effect on prices.
That's the issue, isn't it? Throwing a few $1 trillion the way of the market. And for a lot of people outside of Wall Street, this is the problem they have with what's going on in financial markets at the moment, Michael. It's the Federal Reserve that has thrown a whole lot of money at this situation. And at some point, it will reach the real economy. It just hits markets a whole lot quicker and disproportionately much more so. And my question to you is whether the Fed and the actions of the Fed over the last couple of months or so has divorced this market even more from what we see in the economy and from what we see over the weekend?
Well, I think the intention of the Fed was to divorce the market from economic reality. I mean, you did not want a credit market reacting to the sort of unemployment numbers that we saw. But I would make the point that it's been a combination of fiscal and monetary expansion this time around. If you look at the personal income numbers that came out on Friday, that really made that point. So as I say, you've had a tremendous injection of cash into the personal sector, which is really only a short-term bridge at this point, combined with, I think, a much longer-lasting injection of monetary liquidity. I think the Fed will leave itself open to criticism from some parties, but there's, if you want to go back and look at what happens when the Federal Reserve does nothing in the face of a crisis, you go back to 1929 to 1932, and you see how helpful that is for the U.S. personal sector.
Michael, I'm wondering, just going forward, what kind of practical response there will be in markets to what we're seeing in terms of the riots, the looting that we saw in some stores. I'm looking at Walmart shares down more than 1%, Target down 2.4%. Is this going to have a protracted effect on the retail sector that does have brick and mortar exposure right now?
I doubt it. I think that you'd have to have a hell of a lot of looting to really affect the market cap of something like Walmart. But I think, again, what it does do is to bring into question the ability of major urban centers to bounce back. I've aired my views before, my negativity on commercial real estate in a city like New York. There are already multiple question marks over the ability of New York to bounce back and become what it was in January 2020. You throw in a lot of civil unrest, and it's an even harder hill to climb.
Michael Schultz, thank you so much to the Market Field Asset Management. Great briefing. Greatly appreciate that this morning. There's no question this is an historic time for the nation. And frankly, the turmoil, John, you see in the United Kingdom and in other nations as well. And it's where the news, the calendar is so important. John, we've got Jobs Day on Friday, but much more before that, don't we?
Well, on the labour market, the expectation is unemployment climbs towards 20%, Tom, that we get a negative 8 million print. That's the median estimate in our survey. But I'd like to pick up on the words of Michael Shaul. The objective, the intention of the Federal Reserve was to divorce this market from the fundamentals, to help build a bridge to the other side. And in many ways, Tom, they have been successful. But that success is a double-edged sword. And the other side of that is the cause that the Federal Reserve stokes inequality and widening inequality. And I thought it was bold of the chairman to be diplomatic, to turn around last week and say that the actions of the Federal Reserve absolutely do not add to inequality, when the experience of the last 10 years suggests that maybe he's wrong.
Well, what's so important about this, John, it really is front and center, is does the unrest that we see, and frankly the unrest that's widely predicted, does that jumpstart that second, third, or fourth tranche of assistance from Washington? I mean, from Friday even, is there a changed policy prescription for Washington?
Well, I hope it sharpens the focus of Washington, D.C. on many fronts. I think it's remarkable, Tom, that we're hardly even talking about this. Some of the enhanced benefits of the last couple of months will be fading as we enter July. And I fail to see much urgency down in Washington at the moment to do something, to move to the next phase. The Federal Reserve is talking about the next phase. I think we need to hear about the next phase from the fiscal policymaker as well.
Well, lots more to come here, and not only here, but in Europe as well, the ECB, and much more. Of course, China front and center, we've barely mentioned this morning. John, why don't you take it out with a data check here on our simulcast?
Well, thanks for embarrassing me, because it's the equity market that's embarrassing us all this morning, completely detached from the mood of this country and from the mood of the world, as equity futures turn positive very briefly in the last 20 minutes or so. Up next on this program, we'll catch up with David Harrow of Harris International Associates on the path forward and on cyclical. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon NA. Member FDIC.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
If you can build that flat-pack wardrobe without looking at the instructions, you've still got it. If you can manage 5 keepy uppies on your first go, you've without question still got it. If you can toss a pancake to the ceiling and not let it hit the floor, surely you've still got it. And if you can just about fit into those jeans you bought 5 years ago, you've definitely still got it. Brute, still got it.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance for our audience worldwide. We're live on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV. Alongside Tom Keene, I'm Jonathan Ferro, together with Lisa Abramowitz, 2 hours away from the opening bell in New York after a week and a month of gains as well on the S&P 500. We advanced just a little bit on equity futures, up 2 points on the S&P 500. We advanced around about 0.1%. No risk aversion in this market, despite the events of the last weekend or so. In the bond market, Treasury set up as follows. Yields higher on a 10-year by 1 basis point to 0.66%. And in foreign exchange, just a little bit of dollar weakness through G10, Tom Keene. Euro-dollar advancing by around about 0.1%.
Turn to the market, John, and a real risk-on, risk-off feel over the last number of days. Of VIX back out to 30 as well. As we speak to Markel Scholl, and we'll have much more forward on the unrest across this nation. Ambassador Haas scheduled to join us in the next hour. It is good to speak to David Harrow. He is one of the world's great international investors. That does well when international stocks does well and does less well when it is a struggle. And it has been a struggle. David, you are in the fabric of the Midwest. You're coming to us from Wisconsin today, and you're based out of Chicago. This unrest that we see, I know it doesn't affect your investment strategy. I know you're going to tell us that, but it colors the international tone. How does the unrest of America change international investment forward?
Well, it depends
whether this becomes a permanent part of the fabric of our society, this unrest and this divisiveness. I think if it's just a passing storm, then it won't have any impact. If this divisiveness continues to elevate and persist, perhaps it will put a tiny little risk premium, all else equal, on U.S. equities. But, I do believe our country will get over this. This is something that I think the wrong people are taking advantage of what was a bad situation, and it brought out the worst in certain people, a certain small element. And I think we're going to get over this. We're a good country. The people here are basically inherently good people, and we'll get control of this, and this storm will pass.
We talked to the technology capitalism minister, Mrs. Vestager, of Brussels earlier this morning, and she is, many Americans would suggest, anti-tech. David, from where you stand in investment, American technology reigns supreme. Is it still a value?
I think in some places you could find reasonable prices in American tech, and specifically in Alphabet. In our global portfolios, we still have a large position in Alphabet because we believe if you mark-to-market cash and their assets and give them credit for some of the things they've been doing and investing, that it's still very much a value. It trades at or below the market multiple when you make those necessary valuation adjustments, and it really should trade well above the market multiple.
David, there's an argument about value coming back finally over growth, which has benefited most over the past few years. And this is something that you adhere to and have underperformed as a result of it. In your recent letter to the shareholders, you were apologetic about it. Why do you believe that's set to change? Because I believe that businesses and stocks really are financial assets, and that the price of these financial assets is an important aspect what makes them attractive. If you could get certain businesses at a fraction of what they're worth being determined by their free cash flow streams. Again, this is the predication that we believe a company is valuable based on what it's able to generate in terms of free cash flow. And if you look at the prices some of these industrial businesses in particular are selling at, that price ultimately will matter. Well, price matters when you buy anything. Now, for a long while, almost the better part of a decade, price has taken a back seat. But when the dispersion between two classes of assets, we'll call them growth assets for lack of a better word, and value assets, reaches such a large level, you're bound to see a rebalancing, especially since when people start to get interested in value assets again, the door to get into these assets is very, very small because they've been so heavily sold. They're trading at very, very low market cap. So my argument is that I don't know exactly when this will happen, but when it does happen, you will see such a snapback because there's so little involvement in these assets today. And to me, this is one of the big opportunities in investing. We're all saying, well, the U.S. market is starting to look pricey, et cetera, et cetera. But then again, you could look at segments of the stock market, and especially if you were to look at my area, international value. I mean, this is probably the worst 4 or 5 months I've had in 34 years. And it's the companies aren't just falling apart and going bankrupt. A lot of these businesses are actually going to come out of this just fine and doing very well. And yet they're still down 30, 40, or 50% year to date. And to us, this really represents opportunity. If you could get quality business franchises selling at low single-digit price-to-cash flow multiples, businesses with good balance sheets and good cash flow streams, think of a Daimler or BMW in Germany, or some of the companies in the European financial sector like a BNP Paribas, or industrial businesses like a Glencore. If you could get these businesses this cheap, this is the time, in our view, to be buying them.
David, we got a taste of that last week in certain segments of this market, specifically the financials and specifically in Europe too. But some of that was largely a top-down story. I hope that European politicians got their act together and moved forward with fiscal stimulus and some form of debt mutualization as well. David, I guess my question for you, so someone who focuses much more on bottom-up, whether those trades in Europe that we got a flavour of performing last week, whether they depend on Europe getting its act together at a European level.
I don't know if Europe will ever get its act together, to be honest, because it's just almost impossible for them to do so. You have so many different agendas within the EU. It's hard to get any kind of a consensus. What I think will propel these and awaken these valuations is just through the economic recovery as people get back to work and as economies reopen. And I think this is the real story. Europe came into this a bit earlier. Remember Italy and Spain? Generally speaking, Europe came into this COVID-19 crisis a little earlier and shut down pretty hard. And they're kind of starting to open in many ways earlier. I mean, you see Italy's opening today and almost completely opening. And the German kids went back to school, I think, in April. And so you're beginning to see normalization that will be the light at the end of this dark economic tunnel. And that, to me, is what will awaken some of these value stories as it becomes evident that these companies made it through the storm. Now, the icing on the cake will be if the European Union could ever get their act together, and if, for instance, the Europeans and the British could ever decide on a trade agreement. This will be icing on the cake. Both of these have some potential, but I think that these things are not needed for this recovery to really take off. What's needed for the stock market recovery in Europe to take off is for the economies to reopen and the light at the end of the economic tunnel. And I think that will be enough to shine some light on these values that I've been talking about.
David, just real quick here, I'm wondering how much your outlook for Europe depends on its relationship with China remaining at least where it is now and not deteriorating further amid a backdrop of rising U.S.-China tensions and sort of pressure that they take some sort of stance here.
Yeah, this is an important question because the Europeans, as well as the Americans, Europe is a big exporting nation. Germany, Italy, France, they're big exporting nations, and one of their big exporting clients is China, as well as the U.S. and as well as the U.K. And so these economic relationships, the stability of these economic relationships are going to be important, as these economies recover. So I do think that is an important factor to watch. The U.S. actually, it's a little bit less so. The U.S. is actually a little less dependent on China for its exports. Certain sectors are very dependent. If you look at like Boeing as an example, and the egg sector. But for the most part, I think the exports that are most at risk for a destabilized China, the Europeans, this is something you have to watch.
David Harrell, thank you so much. With Harris Associates, thrilled that he could be with us today. Guys, what I want to do in the simulcast, we welcome all of you on Bloomberg Radio in Washington and Boston, New York, early morning on the West Coast on Sirius XM. All of you listening digitally at home, we say good morning on our simulcast. John, I think we've really failed at talking about China today and the news flow. Is the trade deal dead, John? I think it is.
It's not dead, but it's breaking. It's cracking. And we see it a little bit more fragile in the last couple of weeks or so. Our reports this morning, Tom, suggesting that Chinese officials have instructed various state-owned ag companies to suspend imports of American farm goods over the last week, Tom. And that's seen against the backdrop where China and the United States and relationships between the two countries are quite clearly breaking down. So I would say the Phase 1 deal is still alive for now, but it's very much on life support, Tom. Some clear breaks in the last couple of weeks.
And the life support here, Lisa, I mean, this is the last thing the northern Midwest farm community needed, right?
Yeah, this is coming at a bad time, and it has been a bad bunch of years due to droughts and a variety of different issues that have hit the farming sector. I find it interesting that U.S. equities respond much more to a growing U.S.-China tension than anything like the unrest that we saw over the weekend, and yet they're bouncing back from the earlier declines if you look at U.S. futures. I'm trying to understand when the markets will even take this seriously, right? I mean, John, I'm just wondering, it seems divorced from everything going on, the action that we're seeing in markets, whether it's tensions abroad or tensions here.
Lisa, I mean, over the last hour, what were the lows? We were down by what? A couple of tenths of 1%. It's hardly responded to that either. The words from the President of the United States on Friday were really strong. I think it lacked the substance that some people feared or expected, whatever side you stand on that particular debate right now. But it is remarkable, nevertheless, and we keep coming back to this, to see equity futures this Monday morning in positive territory. It doesn't matter to what degree they're in positive territory, just to see them there in the green of 4 points and up a tenth of 1%. It's just